Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the WHIP, the We Have Interviews podcast. I'm your host, Brenden, the GM of the eMLB Baltimore Orioles. Joining me today is 1.0 GM, real life director of communications for the Cincinnati Reds, and sexiest GM in eMLB, Jared Rollins. Jared, how you doing today?
Obviously, I'm pretty great because I'm here with you, Brenden.
Hell yeah. I got the title right?
Senior director, but hey, that's who's counting.
Senior director. We'll add a little addendum there. I'll make a note for Andrew that at 15 something he needs to put senior on the screen.
Yeah,
All right.
he can impersonate you, right? He can just drop it in the voice.
He can,
there.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get started here. In the new division format, you are in the NL East, which is looking like it's going to be one of the weakest divisions in the league, which should give you a pretty good shot at challenging for the playoffs this year. But in order to talk about the playoffs this year, I want to go back and start the story at the end of last year. You had another losing season, going 70 and 92. Trey Griffey missed most of the last month and a half of the season. He missed a month and a half in the last 2 months of the year. How are you feeling about your team coming out of last season?
I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, when Trey Griffey got hurt, which was a little bit toward the middle end of July, we had started to play a little bit better, kind of hovering, starting to get closer to 500 and maybe playing a little bit better. And I was thinking, here at the trade deadline, I could actually add a couple of pieces and just see if I could end up with a winning record. That was kind of my goal going into last season, was to maybe get in with a record around 500, a record somewhere around there, to kind of take that first step back from a couple of rough seasons. But when Trey went down, I was like, there's really not a whole lot to play for here, and I pretty much knew right away that it was going to be a long-term injury that would take him out most of the rest of the season. So at that point, that was when I kind of cashed in on some guys, traded Jordan Hicks, Lance McCullers, cashed in some of those spots, and just knew that the rest of the season was going to be a trial period with some younger guys coming in. So the final record ended up being still pretty bad, but it wasn't really something that concerned me too much heading into this season, because I knew why we ended up with that bad of a record. I think who knows what would have happened, but if Trey Griffey stays healthy, I think we end up somewhere close or right around 500 and are really in a spot to have that be a first step towards something else. So I feel pretty good with a lot of the core guys coming back, guys that are young and developing, and also some of the veterans we added. So I'm pretty excited. I'm ready to get this season underway and see what some of these guys do together.
Yeah. Well, you do have a lot of young guys who form the core of your team, and a lot of those guys have come to the team because this is your record over the time that you've been in eMLB. The team has frequently struggled to mend towards the bottom of the standings in the NL Central. Obviously, we talk about that, that 2026 year maybe being a result of Trey Griffey going down. I did want to ask you, how have you approached this rebuild with the Cincinnati Reds, knowing it was going to be a long-term process, and dealing with now 4 straight losing seasons and 5 seasons in this league not making the playoffs?
Yeah, it's been tough because especially in a market like Cincinnati, even in eMLB being a smaller market, when you have the losing seasons on top of that, you're already small market size gets even smaller with the fan interest. So, that was why it was kind of important for me just to go ahead and cash in on some of those higher price guys last year, get those salaries off my books, so that heading into this offseason I could have some money to play with. So it's been a little tough, in those first couple of seasons of 2.0. Kind of made a surprising run to almost make the playoffs that first season. Came down to the last weekend, and Andrew's Cardinals ended up winning the division. And then I made some moves for the 23 season, and that just really didn't pan out, and kind of cost me some prospect capital, and tried to go a little bit all in to try to get over that final hump into the playoffs, and just wasn't in the cards. So, that trying to take that shortcut probably set me back a couple of seasons, just with the prospects that I had to give up, and kind of tied me into a couple contracts. So I feel like it was a learning experience. It did allow me to kind of play around with some different guys and kind of get a better sense of maybe what kind of team I wanted to build. So I feel like I at least took something from it, even if it didn't go very well.
Well, most of the successful GMs in this league, the teams that are frequently making the playoffs, you're talking about the Astros, you're talking about the Nationals. Obviously, they had a down season last year, but before then, they haven't had long periods of not winning. You think that maybe, like you said, the lessons you take away from that might equip you to stay on top once you get there longer?
I think so, because you know, it, in some cases that's hard. It was hard for me at first because, like, for example, in real life, again, I work for the Reds, and so a guy like Jesse Winker on my eMLB team, he was there, and he was heading into a contract year, and he had a great year, and so I was like, all right, I want to keep Jesse around. I like having Wink, on my team, so I signed him an extension that, like, I never should have signed him to in this league, and so some of that kind of think moves that I made based on that, I know I'm not going to make again, because we're playing a sim game here. These guys aren't quote unquote real. So there's going to be some things that I did before there that I know I'm not going to necessarily do again. Trying not to get too attached to guys. I think we all get a little bit attached to certain players, whether it's prospects or guys on our major league team that we want to keep around. So I think I'll be able to have a little bit better mentality for that to make moves when I need to make moves.
I like it. I like it a lot, and I'm certainly hoping that a lot of the more patient moves pay off for you down the line. Um, Now we can move forward. We can, the past is in the past. We can start looking forward to what you've done in preparation for this year. I did want to talk about some of the moves you made this offseason, starting off with the pitching staff. Arguably, pitching in Great American Ballpark is hard. Everyone knows that. It's a super home run friendly environment. And last year was crazy for homers. These are the notable additions you have made to your pitching staff. Um, that's three guys who it looks like which could be slotted into the rotation next year, and Andrew Jenkins in the bullpen. How do you feel like these moves will help you moving forward into 2027 and beyond?
I feel pretty good about them. Definitely Bauer, Martin, and Keller are going to be in the starting rotation to begin the season. My CCP Jimmy Potts is going to be in there in the one of those slots as well, and then the 5 spot I'm kind of deciding between a couple guys. But with especially with Martin and Keller, there's really not a long term commitment there. Bauer, I am for this season and potentially next season. So they're guys that can come in this year and help kind of stabilize the pitching staff. And I could potentially make a longer commitment to them, or have the flexibility to move on to a couple of younger pitchers that I have coming up that aren't quite ready yet. So I kind of liked that part of adding some of these guys, to a team that I felt like, with just some average starting pitching and combined with the offense that I have, could really be somebody that could get into the playoffs, especially, as you mentioned, at the top with the revised division, and, the NL East being, just not as difficult of a division as the NL Central had been previously. So I saw that as an opportunity where it is for the short term, but it's not in a way that really takes away from a lot of my future planning. I sacrificed some pieces there, but other than Rogelio Ramos going to you in the deal that was part about getting rid of Javi Baez, and also bringing in Brad Keller, the rest of the guys that like I gave up in the Bauer deal and the Jenkins deal aren't guys that really hurt me all that much to lose.
It was more about just shuffling some mid to low level minor league talent for small major league upgrades that you don't have
Yeah,
much of a commitment to.
yeah. Like, for example, in the Bauer trade, I traded Alan Brocale, who was a Rule 5 pick last year and had a really nice season for me. but he's a first baseman, third baseman. I've got Barrios at third. I've got Dylan Humphrey, a young first baseman I really like. So I felt like if I was going to make a move in the offseason to add pitching, Brooke Hale would probably be a guy I'd have to include, being that he's a young guy with some potential. So I kind of knew going in that he was going to most likely be on the move for pitching at some point in the offseason.
Yeah, that's fair. He had a good year, but probably somebody who, with first base being one of the easier positions to play, someone you feel like you can replace more easily.
Right. Yeah. And again, he had a good first year there. That was probably. I don't know that he can have a better year than that. If you look at his ratings and everything, he could probably have some more seasons like that. But that's probably the top of his range, I would think.
Oh, that's fair. Well, speaking about first base, in addition to making a handful of trades, which we'll talk about here in a minute, you made 3 signings of note. We already talked about the first one. That's Brett Martin, low cost, potentially pretty high reward. He had a really good year last year, especially limiting home runs in last year's crazy environment. But your second major league signing was for Matt Wallner, and that is not the right number. That was supposed to be a 4, but I was editing Gleyber Torres' numbers earlier. I put it in the wrong one. There we go. That's a little bit more reasonable. Matt Wallner, a guy who's known for his power, probably can platoon or play a decent chunk of the innings at first base. Do you feel like he's someone that you can maybe get a lot of value out of?
Yeah, because again, part of the obviously pitching was the biggest priority for me heading into this offseason. But there's also the factor of, I mean, if I have some places where I can even boost this offense even more, why not go ahead and go for that? So between that first base DH spot, there's what I envision really is probably 3 guys getting, pretty much all of those at bats there, with Wallner, Blaze Jordan, and Dylan Humphrey cycling through, those 2 spots. Wallner's a guy who has had, some big home run numbers before. Coming to Great American Ballpark, he could hit a lot of long balls in that ballpark. So I kind of, see him as somebody that's really going to be my primary DH against right-handed pitching, and somebody that I think could really, have a pretty decent bounce back season there.
Yeah, and the power element I feel like is one of the main reasons you would be optimistic about him.
Yeah.
Do you feel you said Wallner you envision being the strong side of the platoon against right-handed pitching?
Yeah.
Which one of these 2 guys between Dylan Humphrey and Blaze Jordan would you envision taking the majority of plate appearances at first base?
I feel like Dylan Humphrey is somebody that is pretty much going to be the everyday first baseman for the most part. Jordan and Wallner are probably going to do mostly the platooning at DH with mixing in some here and there to give Humphrey a day off. But I really like Humphrey's plate discipline, his contact. He doesn't have a lot of power coming from that kind of corner infield spot. So that's something that is a little bit lacking there. But I kind of like his mix of skills there in the lineup to get on base, to get some timely gap hitting, and things like that to balance things out.
Someone who's less boom or bust and more solid all the way around.
Right, exactly.
All right. Well, you made one other signing of note because it was a pretty quiet season for you on the free agent market outside of minor league guys. And that's Gleyber Torres, who got a $15.5 million deal right as spring training was starting. Not terrible value, but he's someone who was clearly overlooked by a lot of other teams and passed over. Why do you feel like he's someone maybe you can get a lot of value out of?
So there's really 2 reasons, why I decided to go with him. One, he does have that flexibility to play second base, and that's really where I'm going to intend on playing him there. He spent most of his time obviously as a third baseman with the Yankees, and that's really where he was classified as. So I can see why a lot of teams would have been hesitant, to give him a bigger contract as a third baseman.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I think his numbers can be really strong as a second baseman. And that middle infield was a spot that I had been kind of going back and forth a little bit on. My initial plan was, okay, I'm going to have some ground ball guys in my rotation. Obviously with Martin and Keller, and even the couple of guys that are fighting for the fifth spot, they're both ground ball guys. So for a while, I was really set on Ernesto Hinojosa playing second base, Sidney Pimentel playing shortstop, who I got from you, and just
Mm-hmm.
going with an ultra defensive kind of up the middle combo there, feeling like Pimentel, his bat obviously lags pretty far behind, but that the rest of the lineup can make up for it.
Yeah.
And the more and more I thought about it, I just really felt like in this day and age with the game and with baseball and with the teams around, that I really needed a better bat as a starter than Pimentel, and I couldn't in good faith just rely on that combo up the middle to be the regular starting middle infield. So I started kind of looking around at some potential trades I could make. But I kind of like Torres's bat. I think it's a bat that could profile well at Great American Ballpark and could really be an impact as a second base bat there, while still playing average defense potentially at that second base spot.
Well, as long as he's not embarrassing himself, if you get plus offense out of it, then that's a bonus.
Yeah, I mean, even last year, for a little while, I kind of experimented with moving Edgar Barrios to second base. Ultimately, I felt like I just need to leave him at third and let him kind of get his glove back there. But for a while, that was something I was toying around with. So I'm not opposed to putting a bat at second base that's going to be more of an average defender.
Okay, I like it. I mean, I completely agree with the philosophy. It's something that I myself, if I did last year with Sherman Newton, so, and the year before that with Medrano. So I like the plan. Looking at the lineup here, we're not going to, overall ratings obviously aren't the best metric, but of the guys that you're looking at for your lineup, walk me through like 1 through 5. Who are your top 5 hitters?
In terms of 1 through 5 in the lineup, or 1 through 5 best?
Oh, so like 1 through 5 best, or 1 through 5 lineup, however you prefer to go at it.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the best hitters, I mean, you got Trey and Barrios, or the top two guys.
Mm-hmm.
As the real. I mean, those guys are leading this team. I could see both of them going over 50 home runs this year. Barrios obviously did it already last year, set a franchise record that in real life and in the sim and in eMLB has stood since 1977. So that was a pretty amazing home run record for him to break when you consider all the sluggers that have come through Cincinnati during the past 45 years. So that was pretty cool to see. That was one of those kind of nice things to happen during the course
Mm-hmm.
of a 90 loss season. Trey Griffey again. I know it always comes off as kind of half joking and being biased, but I really do think he's just going to be an incredible player for quite a few years to come, and I'm hopefully looking forward to seeing what he can do for a full healthy season.
Hit 40 with only 107 games last year.
Yeah, I mean he was on his way to the MVP Rookie of the Year, easy double play there. I feel like. I really think Taylor Trammell can bounce back, in the outfield. His ratings, his skills have dropped off, the last couple seasons. But he still has the potential to be a high on base guy, good gap power, good contact, and steal a lot of bases. And I'm going to put him back at the leadoff spot and hopefully, him be the table setter for Griffey and Barrios from there, and see if he can do that. I think after those three guys, you kind of get into some players who are pretty evenly across. We talked about Dylan Humphrey. We talked about, Blaze Jordan. Jim Stone is going to be in a little bit of a platoon in the outfield. He's had some really good numbers against like right-handed pitching in the past, and struggled against lefties. So, he's going to be in that platoon there, in the outfield with Antonio Cabello, who had a really surprising good season last year. Um, and then behind the plate, Ethan Hearn, as a rookie last year, he was kind of a throw-in piece in some, in a lot of people's eyes in the Barrios trade. That Cody, I have to give him credit. Cody, suggested throwing him in there since he was getting Forrest Heidered in the trade, and wouldn't really have a spot for him. And he's turned out to be a really valuable piece for me as a hitter behind the plate. His defense is fairly solid too, but his bat has looked really well so far through his first season.
And offensive catchers can be really valuable. We've seen that a lot this league.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I kind of got a little bit sidetracked and wanted to talk about your lineup here. I did want to ask you about a couple of the trades that you had made this year. We'll get back over to the trade screen. We talked about getting Andrew Jenkins. We talked about getting Trevor Bauer. You made a somewhat surprising move in the eyes of the eMLB Sportsnet commentator, getting Brady House from New York in exchange for, I don't know why it always sends you to the top, Jonathan India, a real life Red who you talk about a lot. Is this a case of you maybe taking advantage of New York wanting to move House, and B, overcoming that bias towards guys who you know in real life?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a combination of the two. Pete had put House on his trade block a couple times last year, and each time, I really had interest in him, just from the standpoint of he's got such great defensive skills, and those just really stick out to me. And again, he's got that potential to have some pretty decent power, that gap power that could end up being home runs at Great American. I did an OST with him this offseason and try to help his contact, help his plate discipline. Because if that bat even comes out to be an average bat combined with that great defense, I mean, that's a pretty valuable guy to have.
Oh yeah.
Whether it's at short or second or wherever that may end up. And India, I really saw as somebody that's kind of like a fringe starter at second base, somebody that I felt was pretty replaceable. And again, the situation that I'm in is he's going to have an arbitration number at that point. That is it really worth me paying a couple $1 million to a guy who is a fringe starter or even a bench guy, that I have several versatile middle infielders at the AAA level that I could plop in there, and knowing also that kind of the re-rates look like they're even then looked like they probably weren't going to happen, or would maybe at least be on pause for a year.
Yeah.
That wasn't really going to be a reason to keep him around either. So I just felt like it was something I could move on from. And again, I really like Brady House. He's somebody that I think could really be a valuable player for me. So to be honest, I was probably going to non-tender Jonathan India.
Really?
So
that's a good, that's a great move than getting a guy you wanted and dumping a guy you weren't planning on keeping.
Yeah. So I'm glad that I was able to get something for him, obviously, and get a guy that I really like too.
All right. Well, talking about getting rid of guys who you really like, this is one that I personally did not see coming. Sending away Hunter Green, another real-life Red, to the Seattle Mariners in exchange for a pitching prospect who's got some nice pitches, but obviously is not the same kind of velocity talent that Green is. Did you feel that you were finally ready to give up on Green?
Yeah, this it's funny. I was looking to move him partly again, just I wasn't really sure that he was a guy that I was going to commit a rotation spot to. And so then it became, am I going to keep him around to be, a swingman, sixth starter, at at a, not a high salary, but again, if you're talking about a guy that's a, fringe starter on a small market team, do I really want to continue, you know, giving a guy that commitment to money? I that's another case where I had signed him to a deal after he had, a really good second season, and then that was, he just had plateaued and really kind of, fell into a funk for a couple of seasons. And it just turned into something where, again, with the prospect that re-rates probably wouldn't be around, um, it just felt like a time to kind of shop for what I could get for him. Adametz is a guy that I got from the Mariners, who he was a little old for his league, but had a dominant season at high A. He's a guy that I feel like, can do an OST to up his velocity. Maybe even do that a couple seasons in a row to bump that up a little bit. And then all of a sudden, it could be a really, really strong, middle or back of the rotation starter, if he really were to pan out. So it was worth it to me to kind of take that flyer on him and be able to get rid of Green and kind of move on from that.
It just sucks to see a guy who obviously is blossoming as a potential ace in Cincinnati not pan out in this universe.
Yeah, and he pitched well for me last year. I mean, his some of his peripherals weren't the greatest, but he turned in a pretty decent season. So part of me was like, man, do I try to give it another go around with him? But it just felt like it was time to move on.
I understand that. Well, I've got one more thing I want to talk to you about here today, and that's we talked about previous seasons. We talked about all the things you did this offseason. Now I can finally give you a chance to say what you think is going to happen to your team this year. Opening day is less than a week away. We talked about you being in the weakest of the 4 new divisions. You think you can win the division. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
You think you're going to win the division?
I feel very confident that I'm going to win the division. I mean, am I guaranteeing it? No. I mean, I'm not
trying to bait that.
Yeah, I got to think about that a little bit. No, there's still some strong teams in that division with Atlanta and Philly. Obviously, it still has a ton of young guys, but I just feel really good about my team and where we're at. I just maybe I'm drinking the hopium, but I feel pretty good.
All right. Well, the 162 games that you got to play. Go ahead and project for me your win-loss record. You can ballpark it if you want, but where do you think you're going to end up?
I still think that this division is still not going to have anybody with a real high win total because again, if I was in the West, like if I swap places with, say, the Brewers, we were in opposite divisions, I would probably be thinking like, all right, if I can finish like 4th or 5th, I'm going to be, dancing in the streets, honestly, so if I were to guess at, what's a reasonable win loss, I mean, I think I can get to around, 90 games, somewhere around there, 89, 90 games. And I think that can be enough to win our division.
Well, so I certainly think so, especially like you figure that the talent level of teams, like you said, Atlanta, Philadelphia, don't forget Washington, Pittsburgh eventually will be good. You figure you'll all kind of be beating up on each other, especially towards the end of the year.
Yeah, and I know that's a big jump for a team that went 72 and 90 last season. But again, I think there's factors as to why that happened, and I do feel like I've made a lot of strong moves to add some guys. I feel like there's several guys who had down seasons last year who, I feel hopeful and pretty good about them bouncing back to have better seasons in the season ahead. So, it's a tall task to go from 72 to 90 wins, but I think it's something that we can pull off.
Okay. I'm rooting for you to do it. I'd much rather see you winning that division as a member of the podcast pals.
There you go.
Go ahead and plug all the other ones. I got a couple more questions here for you, then I'm going to let you go. Um, Trevor Bauer projects to be your ace at least early in the year with Potts as he develops coming in. Do you expect to have any all stars out of your pitching staff?
Um, do I expect to have any all stars? I tell you what, I think Potts could still have a strong enough season to make the All Star team. Um, I think you know he definitely had to get his feet wet last season when he came up in September, but I think he can be an all star. And I do think a guy like a Bauer could potentially be an all star in the starting rotation there as well. I also wouldn't put it past I'm gonna put Andy Glasser, who's a hard throwing young righty, in the closer spot. I thought about kind of keeping the bullpen a little bit more fluid there. Like, I know you're an advocate of that, and there's a lot of guys are. I think I'm going to plop him in the closer spot, and I could see him potentially piling up a lot of saves and strikeouts and maybe finding his way there.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to ask the same thing on the offensive side, but with a slight twist. Outside of Trey Griffey and Edgar Barrios, do you expect to have any all stars?
The catching spot is a challenge. I think Ethan Hearn could easily be worthy of being in the All Star game, but there's a lot of stacked catchers out there in eMLB, so that could be a tough one for him. Again, I'm on the Tatram rebound train, so I definitely think Taylor Trammell could bounce back and be the player he was 2 seasons ago. Be kind of the former MVP candidate. Maybe not quite that good again, but I could easily see him bouncing back to be a real terror at the top of the lineup and somebody that could get into the All Star game.
All right, awesome. Well, man, I think that about wraps us up here. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do this season. I really and like I said, I am rooting for you, partly from a little bit of bias, but also, man, you've been at this a while. I want this rebuild to bear its fruit.
Yeah, I want this. I'm ready for the season to get here, ready to see what these guys are going to do. Again, I think I think it's a process that you go through. Am I going to be discouraged if this season turns out to be another losing season? Yeah, I'll probably be pretty disappointed. But I also still feel like the core of the team is still there, to build upon even after this year is over with. So I'd like for this to be a year where we take a big step forward, but it's not going to be the end of the world if we don't.
Trust the process.
Trust the process.
All right. Well, man, thank you for joining me today. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to having you back on here once I get to interview you after you've made the playoffs and won the division.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on here as your second guest here. Hopefully, more of the guys jump on. It's always good to chat about the old league, man.
Well, we're gonna be having Tom, GM of the 2024 World Champion Angels, and Sean Sadier, the GM of the last AL Central champ winning Indians, coming up next. So thank you guys for joining us for another episode of The Whip. I'm not very good at outros. I did a really bad one last time, so I'm just gonna go ahead and own it. Links for everything eMLB will be in the description. Our editor Andrew takes care of all of that. From me, Brenden, from JR, peace.
Am I the idiot?
Probably. I mean, that's what I think about myself all the time.